They may be called the next generation, but they're the church of today. Reach, disciple, and mobilize students to share the hope of the gospel. This is the GenSend podcast with Shane Pruitt, Paul Wooster, and Lacey Villa Sr.
We are back with the GenSend podcast. I have with me always Shane and Paul, and today we're actually diving into an article that Shane wrote. So how are you guys doing today?
Doing well. Always love these conversations with great friends. And I feel like at the end, we'll wait and see if we say it today, but I feel like at the end of every one of these conversations, I always tell y'all know this, that once the recording stops, I always say, I think this is my favorite one. I'm anticipating this is going to be my favorite one. Yeah.
Hey, that's what I love about working with you, Shane. You got that positive attitude. You're like, the best is yet to come. Like, that was the best session ever, So I might as well. I'd rather have that.
Awesome.
I'd rather have that than someone that's like, well, let's see how we could have. It's like, no, let's enjoy the ride as we go.
But it's good though. I feel it's a balance because we have some realists on our team too. That don't mind speaking up, going, it wasn't that awesome.
Everyone needs that in their life, just to bring them down, bring them down, but bring them to reality, bring them to earth.
Shane was just telling us also about his new wardrobe. So if you see him this fall or spring, you'll have to compliment him on his new outfit.
Thanks, Lacey. I appreciate that.
He's always rocking the fits. Always rocking the fits.
Yeah. After at least a couple years prayer requests from my oldest daughter, I finally retired all the skinny jeans. It's been an answer to prayer for her.
There are guys listening right now, and they're like, "Skinny jeans are out of style." What?
They're like, no. They're hitting stop right now. They're done with this conversation already. Yeah.
That's like, you guys can't relate to this because you're guys, but there was a whole movement of girls moving to the middle part last year, and every millennial girl or older Gen Z like me was like, no, I'm keeping my side part forever. We're not going to the middle part.
Yeah,
because it'll come back in a year or two. The side part. So.
Yeah. Why change everything? But I'm excited to dive into today's conversation. I think also it's a little personal, not only because Shane wrote it, but also because he has a senior in high school and a new middle schooler. And what we're talking about today is how to close those 4 major gaps in your student ministry. And so the first one's the gap between middle school and high school, the gap around getting their driver's license, and the gap between their junior year and senior year. And finally, the one we've probably heard the most about, the gap between youth ministry and college ministry. And a lot of this was based off of Lifeway's research. And according to Lifeway Research, about 2/3 or 66% of young American adults who attended a Protestant church regularly, so I think that counts as 2 or 3 times a month, for at least a year, they said they dropped out of attending church for about a year between the ages of 18 to 22. And some of those never returned to their faith. And so that's probably the gap that most of us have heard about. And that's that gap between youth ministry and college ministry, like we said. So why do y'all think, let's start here with this one. Why do y'all think this is still such a major gap? And what are some things that youth and college ministries can do to make this handoff better?
Such a good question. I think part of the reason is because those other gaps have not been discussed. And so by the time even if someone's in the youth ministry physically, a lot of times they've checked out by the time they graduate from high school. And so there's not even that desire to go plug into a church because we miss those other gaps. And so that's something to consider. Is I think this conversation that I know Shane even posted this, he said that article he wrote could be one of the most important articles he's written. And I agree. I think this idea of the handoff and the gaps between these different things, that we need to really double down our efforts to help students connect with the church and connect to their next stage during these key transitions. But one of the reasons I focus on collegiate ministry is because I've seen it over and over again, is that the friends a freshman student makes those first month on campus often determines the course of the rest of their entire lives, actually. And so if a college ministry can help them and reach them, and I know I have a lot of friends that are right now, they're in the midst of their welcome week where they're reaching out to freshmen and things like that. And so I think that is one of the most strategic gaps that the church can be in, is right when a student, that first month that the student's on a college campus, how are the churches, how are the college ministries doing everything they can to make it an easy, welcoming environment? There's more, but man, toss it over to Shane. Let's see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, that's such a good word, Paul. And to give a little bit of a preview of really probably the dominant conversation that Paul and I have had one-on-one is really this idea of what we're kind of calling right now the handoff. How do we bring the collegiate world and student world together? I think a part of this gap problem is in some ways, us as leaders have kind of helped cultivate that gap problem, because what we've done on a large scale is we've had like the collegiate world and then the youth ministry world almost separate and siloed for so long that students kind of fall through that gap because we've kept them so separate and siloed. Now, listen, should there be a silo for collegiate level? Absolutely, on some level. Should there be a silo for youth ministry? On some level, absolutely. But how do we also start bridging that to where we're working together more and bringing those worlds together? And so Paul and I, hopefully over this next year, we're hoping to bring some thought leaders together and thought provokers together, some resources that how do we bridge those gaps better? Because I feel like if we would do that as the bride of Christ and as leaders, then students are only going to benefit from that. I think some practical things that we can do is on the youth ministry side. I think as youth leaders and youth pastors, what we got to do is start changing how we view the oversight of our students. I think in the past, we felt like our oversight of our students ended on graduation Sunday. You know what I mean by graduation Sunday? Usually it's the weekend that churches honor the graduating seniors, right? And we see them walk the stage and we usually give them a book and some kind of gift and stuff. And then we think we're done. I want to say, let's expand our care and our watch care of those graduating seniors and go, in a sense, you're probably never done. They're always going to see you as their youth pastor, right?
Yeah.
But even in watch care, don't see your watch care as being done until they've plugged into another local church or until they've plugged into the young adult ministry, collegiate ministry in your church. If they move off and go to school, your watch care is not done until you help them plug into an on-campus ministry. Like expand your watch care to go, hey, I'm not done until an effective handoff has truly taken place. Meaning if they've gone off to school, they've plugged into another local church or into an on-campus ministry and you've helped with that. If they're staying in town and staying at your church, you're not done until you know without a doubt they fully have plugged in to that next stage of whatever that looks like at your church, whether it's college ministry, young adult ministry, singles ministry, whatever that looks like. So I'd say expand your watch care past graduation Sunday. And then I think a lot of times, let's be more proactive instead of reactive. A lot of times we go, okay, they've graduated. They have not transitioned well in the collegiate or young adult ministry. What do we do now? That's reactive. I think we'd be more proactive going, hey, starting their senior year or junior year, what are some ways that we're helping them plug into college ministry or young adult ministry already? I know a lot of college ministries do this already at the local church or on-campus ministries. BCMs do this. In fact, like you mentioned a while ago, Lacey, and our daughter well, Reagan, she's a senior. But she's already kind of determined what her top school is, which is, in Oklahoma. And we'll see how it goes, but that's where she wants to go. So what I've done is I already know the BCM director there. And Kyle, all throughout the year, he does what he calls senior nights. And it's where high school seniors are invited on campus and invited to their ministry, invited to their worship service to come worship with college students. And they can do that all throughout their senior year. So Reagan and I are planning going to Oklahoma multiple times this year during those senior nights to help her start getting plugged in already before she graduates. Yeah.
Yeah, I love
Mhm.
that idea. That's so cool. And yeah, most of the students I've seen transition well, it's because they were looking forward to the ministry that they were going to get to be a part of,
Yeah,
or the church they
great.
were going to get to be a part of. And so I think that really is a key factor in it. Shane, you, I think, and correct me if you're wrong, were one of the first people to mention these other three gaps in the student ministry, at least in this recent article. So how did you determine these gaps? And what have y'all both seen student ministries do well to respond to these transition phases in a student's life?
Yeah, when it comes to, these four gaps, the gap between middle school and high school, the gap around getting your driver's license, the gap between junior year and senior year, because once they get that senior schedule and all those responsibilities, many of them, like including our daughter, they're already taking college classes as a junior and senior. So they're already starting to think like a college student. So there's that gap between junior and senior year. And then we know the natural gap between high school and college. I would love to say, we got it from all this research and data that's out there and statistics, but there's really not a lot because like I think you said is everybody knows those gaps there, but we really haven't dove into why and what's causing them. So really a lot of this has just come from observation of being around a lot of student ministries and collegiate ministries, and then a lot of conversations with collegiate leaders and senior pastors and youth pastors. Paul, our good friend Keith from Resonate Church, probably the first conversation I had around these gaps was with him last year at the College Coaching Network. He was there and it was just kind of over lunch. We were sitting at the table and he goes, Shane, we're finding we're getting fewer and fewer college students dumping into our ministry at Resonate Church because they're never making it through the student ministry to begin with. So before they ever hit that gap, they've already fallen through other gaps. And I was like, yeah, I'm seeing that too. And so we kind of identified just over lunch, eating fajitas, those kind of four gaps. And then it just started going through conversations with youth pastors and collegiate leaders saying, hey, are you seeing this as well? And they absolutely are seeing that as well. So really, Lacey, just through kind of observation and conversation, and I think we all realize it's there. We just don't really know what to do with it. In fact, I think in the article, I said we're hitting the snooze button. There's two kinds of people. Like there's me. I set my alarm to wake up at the last minute possible. My wife sets her alarm like an hour before she actually has to get up because she loves to hit snooze over and over. I don't understand that. Those people need Jesus. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's like one of those things. It's like the alarm keeps going off that we have these gaps and we keep hitting the snooze button instead of addressing them. And we got to wake up to them. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, ultimately, it's a discipleship issue because if we're not doing a good job discipling them through each gap, then they'll drop out at any given point. But knowing that these are common themes and trends can help us reverse engineer and create discipleship pathways and things to help students stick with us and engage. I think it's an engagement factor. Is our students genuinely engaged in what we're doing, not just attending our events? And so mission trips, evangelism, those type of things where they get hands-on training can really help students experience God in an authentic way.
Yeah, I really do think verbalizing this and like putting it into actual words, because I think, all right, we all see it and we know it's there, but actually identifying, oh, these are the gaps. It's powerful because it allows us to really step into those things and to be more aware in those transition seasons of life. I've personally seen a ton of students, and I know when I was a student, they dropped off when they got their driver's license. That was like a really big one that I saw. And so what are some things that leaders and pastors can do to close this gap? But I would also add, maybe even more so, what are some things that parents can do in this transition?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the one that's the most confusing for leaders sometimes, Lacey, because you're like, oh man, I got these students, they're in my core, they're serving, and they're so dependent on other people to give them rides, right? They're so dependent on their older sibling or their friends parents or their own parents to give them rides. And so as I remember as a youth pastor, I would go, oh man, when so-and-so gets their driver's license, they're going to be all in because they don't have to depend on other people for rides. And then they disappear and you're like, where did they go? I think it's the driver's license that gives them a little bit of extra freedom, right? So typically you'll start really seeing, are they truly bought into the ministry? Are they truly bought into following Jesus? Or was it just kind of borrowing their parents' faith, meaning they came because their parents came? When they start driving themselves, there's that extra layer now of like where they're really choosing and deciding to bring themselves and get themselves there. So I go back to what Paul says. I think it's a discipleship issue. Like, hey, we start in 6th, 7th grade, whenever that is in your context, when they join the student ministry and go, hey, we really want to teach them to love Jesus, love the church, serve, be plugged in, be known, be in community, be in a discipleship relationship. Maybe possibly they're discipling others as they're getting older, because all that's going to be sticking power. On the parents' end, I'm so glad, Lacey, you added parents to this, because here's what we do. And Casey and I, we were just as guilty. We had 6 kids, now 5, and one of ours is in heaven. But we were like, I remember I was terrified for Reagan to get her driver's license. Casey couldn't wait, because she was like, it's help. You know what I mean? Like, now she can go to the grocery store. Now she can go take her siblings to practice or pick them up at school. Like, now it's an extra vehicle. It's help. So I think a lot of times as parents, we're pulling our students out of student ministry or out of church or out of community or out of their small group, because we're giving them all these extra responsibilities to help us, going, hey, well, now you got to go to the store. Now, well, you know what? Your sister has basketball practice on Wednesday nights, and we need you to go pick her up now instead of going to church. So as parents, I think we need to be real cautious of that. Yes, it's an extra set of wheels. Yes, it's extra help. But as a parent, help them keep the main thing, and those priorities straight in that. So I think that's important. Also, at 16, when they get their driver's license, a lot of teenagers, that's when they get jobs. What we tend to do is we need to be more proactive here. And parents, we need to help our teenagers do that, is to go, hey, our 16-year-old's going to get a job at Chick-fil-A. And so, they get Sundays off, praise the Lord. But what they forget to ask for is Wednesdays off. So now they've got the job, they're working, and then they want to go back and ask for Wednesdays off, and it's too late then. What we need to help our students do is, like, if they're going to get a job, from day one, at the beginning in those interviews, go, hey, I want to work here, but Wednesdays or Tuesdays, whatever that looks like for your context, are non-negotiable. That's church. That's a high priority to me. And I'm not going to work on Wednesday nights or Tuesday nights, Thursday nights, whatever that looks like for your church. So parents, we need to help our teenagers be bold enough to make that statement up front, because it's a lot easier to declare the days you need off when you're going through the interview process versus when you already have the job and now you want to go ask for those days off.
That's good. Would you add anything to that, Paul?
No, actually, I was going to bring up that part-time job situation, because I do think that's actually a lot of times that's driven by the parents. The parents are trying to get them to, and it's good, those responsibilities and those things. I think it's great for a teenager to have a part-time job. But if they're getting more hours at Taco Bell or Chick-fil-A and they're not getting more hours in the church, what do you really think is going to give them more long-term benefit for their life? I think we failed if we prioritize even good opportunities like part-time jobs at the expense of a true commitment to the local church.
Yeah, and a lot of times there's even more than, it's like the jobs, the sports, the family. I mean, there's so much. And so I think, if you're starting with your family culture as this is our number one priority, is like making sure that we're committed to the Lord and committed to our church and things like that, then obviously everything else will center around it, which I think is good. And I know, Shane, you mentioned that all the time, especially when it comes to outside activities and sports and all those things, good things, really good things. But we don't want them to be the main thing.
Yeah.
I know our heart here at NAM really is to see the next generation discipled and sent out to live on mission. But often we can't mobilize students to share the gospel if they haven't first been discipled in the word and learned how to share the gospel and all those things. And so is there a balance, maybe both of you can speak to this, to being seeker sensitive for new students, but also diving deeper into doctrine and theology with more core students so that it's not so easy to just walk away?
Good question. Yeah, I think so. I think there's a way, and I don't know if I love the term seeker sensitive because of how it's been used in the past, but I do think it's good to have a fun, welcoming, excellent environment or environments that new non-Christian students can come attend. The gospel makes sense to them. They're welcomed. It's fun, exciting. I'm a big fan of all that stuff, but that assumes that you have a next layer where you're personally discipling students and going deep and training them in how to have devotional times. I think even more so than doctrine and theology is having a regular devotional time. Not just teaching them how to do a quiet time, but really helping them develop that habit of prayer, time daily in the word, scripture memory, evangelism, those type of things. If you get a student doing those habits, practicing those habits, not in a legalistic way, but if a student starts doing those things on their own, man, they learn how to feed themselves, then they're going to be really healthy and able to weather the different storms and different gaps that come up in their life.
Yeah, such a good word, Paul. Yeah, and I think, Lacey, in the New Testament, you see really like both models, right? And so I think we got to run that on almost like a railroad track. If you remove one of the tracks, the train's going to fall off, right? And so I think the track that the gospel runs on is in the New Testament, you see there is a come and see model, right? Like come and see, come and be a part, gather with us. Come and get to know us. Let us get to know you. So there is that come and see model, but there's also that go and tell model. And I think it's both that the gospel has to run on. If you remove one of them, in a sense, the train falls off the track. So there's got to be a come and see, go and tell. I think a lot of times, to be honest, we're probably a lot better at the come and see than we are at the go and tell. Right. And I think if we're going to be effective for the future in young adult, college, student ministries, we're going to have to get better at the go and tell, because we already know Gen Z, statistically speaking, is the least religious generation we've ever seen in the United States. I just assume the alpha generation is going to be even more so. So that means the come and see, chances are fewer and fewer Gen Z, especially alpha generation, are just going to wake up one day and go, I think I should go to church. You know what I mean? Used to, if you wanted to build a church, just put a church sign up and it's like Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. And a lot of churches operate like that. Hey, just make an excellent worship experience. Let's make some fun stuff. If you build it, they will come. And I think it's just going to be fewer and fewer situations where we see that. We're going to have to equip our people to go and tell. So yes, it's still come and see, but it also has to be go and tell. And we have to disciple our people to do that. And then one thing I think we do as leaders, and especially as communicators, those who are teaching God's word and preaching God's word, is that if you're in a crowd, and it doesn't matter if the crowd is 12 or 1,200, you're typically going to have 4 types of people in that crowd. And I think as communicators, as leaders, we always have to be aware of all 4, and maybe even ask ourselves, like, how am I addressing all 4 of these people? And those 4 people are in the crowd, those who are lost and know they're lost, meaning they're not believers and they know they're not believers, but they're there. The second type of person is those who are lost, but they think they're found. Meaning this, like they equate being a Christian to going to a building or showing up, or I believe in the big man upstairs. I hate that term, but in Texas, we hear it all the time, right? So there's people in the crowd who are actually lost, but they think they're found. The third type of person is those who are found, but they think they're lost, meaning it's probably just they need to be discipled, or they have some bad theology, meaning they messed up that week. And so they think because they messed up, they lost their salvation or something, right? And so those who are found but think they're lost, and we need to help them journey through that. And then the fourth kind of person in any crowd is those who are found and know they're found. So how are we taking them deeper? How are we mobilizing them? So I think we need to keep all four people in mind every time we gather and go, how are we ministering to them? What in this message challenges that person? What mobilizes that person? What invites that person to follow Jesus? So those who are lost and know they're lost, those who are lost but think they're found, those who are found but think they're lost, and those who are found and know they're found. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I would add about even our weekly worship gatherings, or whatever you call your student ministry meeting, I think there is a hunger for an experience of the Holy Spirit in those moments. And so I see a danger when we systematize and structure our meetings so much that every single minute is dialed in, and there's no room for the speaker to follow the Spirit into something that, or even the worship leader, or people praying, or even having opportunities for response time. I think that we saw in different things, revivals this spring and things like that, that this generation wants an authentic encounter with the living God. And so we need to be, as teachers and communicators and worship leaders, filled with the Spirit ourselves and able to respond to that, but also fostering an environment where, hey, if you're coming, if you're checking out this event, like, get ready to encounter God. And that comes with teaching God's word in a clear, authoritative, and even bold way. I've actually found that even if I have a group of non-Christians, a whole spectrum, I can't preach hard enough to this generation. So we will have fun, we'll have food, we'll have games maybe, but when it gets time to preach the gospel, man, we're going to roar the gospel. We're going to proclaim the gospel. And then I've just seen that's what students want. They don't want something that's kind of like TED Talks with a Bible verse or something. No, they want, like, actually one time we were doing topical Bible studies that were kind of like, I don't know, they're video based and stuff. And we had non-Christians come to us and say, so when are we going to do Bible studies? Where we get like actual Bibles out. And I'm like, awesome. Oh, bro, we were doing that to reach you, but you're saying you want to,
Let's go.
And
I love that.
So that's what this generation wants. They want the Bible, right?
Yeah,
so.
I love that. So you even got unbelievers going, when are we actually going to talk about the Bible?
Yeah.
And Paul, that's such a good word too. And like, listen, I'm a big fan of time management, and things should be organized. Like, God's not the author of chaos and confusion. We know that. But it does feel like sometimes we're like, hey, we want to be Spirit led. God move, do something that blows our mind. But as long as it fits in planning center, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think we forget sometimes when, non-believers show up, or people who are seeking or whatever show up to church, they're expecting to pray. They're expecting to hear the word of God. They're not expecting to come and just have fun. I mean, if you got invited to church, you know what you're stepping into, and they're wanting to know more about God. And so I think, like you said, Paul, we should dive into it because they're hungry for it. They want it. We shouldn't shy away from that. Shane, you mentioned in the past, and I love this because I see this really often, I think, and it's so easy to fall into this, but you've mentioned in the past the danger of a student or a college ministry being run like a church within the church. Can you talk about some of those dangers, and how have you seen ministries navigate this well?
Yeah, absolutely, Lacey. And I would contend that's probably one of the most common causes of people falling through gaps, is when we run our ministries like churches within a church. Because if you think about it, and I think probably student ministries and collegiate ministries, for lack of a better term, are the worst about doing this. So a lot of times, let's just take a student ministry as an example of like, hey, we got our own name, we got our own vision statements, we got our own theme, we got our own identity, we got our own culture, we got our own leaders. And then when a student graduates out of that, then they're expected on some practical level to go join a whole new church that just meets at the same address, right? Like they don't know the culture, they don't know people, they don't know the direction, they don't know vision. And so I think the game changer and the paradigm shift is this: student ministry and college ministry at the local church has to be a part of the whole life of the church. It's just part of the whole life of the church. It cannot be its own separate thing. And so I found the two ways to do that is we want to operate like Titus chapter 2, right? The older men take the younger men, the older women take the younger women, and we want to be multi-generational. I think when we cut our discipleship legs out from under us is when we are so siloed. Now, listen, I want to make this very clear for those who are listening. I don't want to cause any confusion going, well, I thought Shane was the next gen guy. And now he's like banging on next gen ministries. No. Listen, I believe in age specific ministries. I do.
Right.
The point I'm making is if we only do that, meaning like, hey, we're always separating people by life stages, meaning all the kids, you go over here, all the teenagers, you go over here, all the college and young adults, you go over here, all the, married go over here, all the married with children go over here, all the empty nesters go over here, all the, we don't really say senior adults anymore because people don't like that. So all the classics, you go over here, right? And we keep everybody separated. Then what we do is we cut our discipleship legs out from under us. Like there is so much a 16-year-old can learn from a 66-year-old. And there's so much a 20-year-old can learn from a 74-year-old or a 40-year-old. And let's be honest, there's a lot that 70-year-olds can learn from 20-year-olds, like how to use their iPhone. You know what I mean? And so there's so much we can learn from each other. That's why Titus chapter 2 is so beautiful. And I think the two areas I've seen done the best in this is usually in serving and mission. Like serve together. Like some of my favorite local churches to show up and preach at is when you walk up and there's the 16-year-old, the 20-year-old, the 40-year-old and the 80-year-old all greeting together. All ages serving in children's ministry, all ages serving in the sound booth, all ages represented on the stage, all ages represented in the offering, or whatever, whatever those serving opportunities are. So I think serving, it can be done in serving. And then the other thing is on mission. Hey, nothing like disciples people more and nothing brings people together more than being on mission together. I think a lot of times we think we make community the goal and say, okay, out of community, we're going to build mission. No. Make mission the goal, because the greatest community builder is mission, being on mission together. And so like, hey, I'm all for youth mission trips and college mission trips, but what about serving our cities, the neighborhoods, and the nations together to go, hey, we're sending 30 people to Germany, and on that trip are teenagers, young adults, families, kids, classics, whatever, like, and they're all serving together. Like, so I'd say those are the two areas where we can really be good at multi-generational, I think, is serving and being on mission together.
Yeah. One thing I would add, often there's elements where a church is putting on men's events, men's retreats, or women's events, women's retreats, things like that, where a college ministry or youth ministry could easily put that in their calendar. Okay, we're going to take our men, our young men to this men's retreat, and they get to rub shoulders with all the other men in the church.
Right.
And it's a great experience for them. So there's things like that the church is already planning. And it doesn't have to take away from, because I do think there is value, like Shane already said, there is value to having your own systems, your own strategies and leaders, and doing making a really excellent ministry. But as long as it's integrated into the overall church and students are really participating in that. Because what we see, and we see this a lot in college ministry too, is when they graduate from college, that's actually another gap that we didn't talk about, is a lot of times students had a great experience in college and a college ministry, but if they don't get truly plugged into a local church and get a taste for that, then when they go to their local church, they're like, hey, they would always bring up, what our college ministry used to do was this, and this, and how come our church isn't doing that? It's like, no, like they missed it on some level. So we need to help make students really fall in love with the local church. And if our students, if they're in love with our ministry but not in love with the local church, we failed, I think. So
Oh
we
man,
need to
what a
make
word,
sure that
Paul.
we
Yeah.
so
Yeah, Paul, specifically maybe those on-campus ministries that aren't tied to a church, how can those college ministries really partner well with churches in the area so that they do fall in love with the local church?
Great question.
yeah, I think that's something that is done, like especially in our family, Baptist Collegiate Ministries. They do a great job. The Baptist Collegiate Ministry leaders that I know personally, and I know a lot of them, is they are churchmen. They really value the local church, and they actually they really long for meaningful partnerships with local churches. And so it kind of has to go both ways, where the campus-based ministry and the local church find ways that they can integrate and serve one another. And so there's that attitude on both sides of not, a lot of times it does cut, if you're not careful, the pastor of the church and the BCM director or campus-based ministry leader can each come to each other with, hey, this is what I need from you. When no, it needs to be like, we need you to give to us, and we need your students to come to our church and serve in our kids ministry. It's no, like, hey, how can our students serve your local church? And how can our church serve your campus ministry? And when churches and ministries come together like that, that's when you really start to see synergy. And that looks a lot of different ways. But one way we did it in Chico was we had the senior pastor of kind of our primary partner church he was the fall retreat speaker every year. So the new students that we were reaching during our first month on campus would come to the fall retreat, and they would hear at the retreat from our senior pastor. Right. And they would fall in love with him and just be like, hey, I guess I'm going to go to that church and I'm going to get baptized. And they would kind of funnel into that. And so there's different ways, just based on your context, that you can make those type of things work.
That's so cool. I love that idea about just bringing in the local pastor to preach at an event or even just one night a week, because that really does impact people to just know that face, know that teaching style, things like that. I know the thing that kept me really involved, or one of the things that kept me involved just at my church specifically throughout so many different transitions, were all the relationships I had with people, whether it was leaders, small group leaders, youth leaders, just friends in the church, or even older people in the church who just discipled me. It really was those relationships that kept me there, kept me connected, because no one wants to go to something where they feel alone or awkward or unknown. They don't want to do that, the scary, just hang by the wall until somebody walks over to them. And so I know, Shane, you mentioned that I think the ministry or the college in Oklahoma does this really well with senior nights. But what are some ways that leaders can really connect students with other people before they transition to a new life stage, whether that's middle school to high school to college, or even college to post-grad? Because I think that is a really big gap as well.
Yeah, great question. And I think that's getting to the practical side of it, right? To go, okay, we realize these gaps are here. So what do we do now? And, it's always relationships. Lifeway did a study several years ago to go, okay, those students who they stick from middle school to high school to college to young adult into the life of the church. What are those key factors? And by far, it was if that person could have 6 to 8 key relationships in the ministry, they always stuck. And I don't know why it was that number, but it was relationships and 6 to 8. And I think a lot of that is, on some level, it's the accountability, right? Depending on the size of the ministry you're in. As a youth pastor, it's hard for you to chase everybody down. As a college pastor, it's hard for you to chase everybody down. As a senior pastor, it's going to be hard for you to chase everybody down. But there's 6 to 8 of us that know each other well and love each other well. Guess what? Well, when Sarah stopped showing up, those 6 to 8 are going to go after Sarah before maybe even the college pastor realizes she's not showing up, or before the senior pastor realizes she's not showing up. So it's got to be relational there. And I think part of that relationship is also, like we kind of already said, but exposing them to the next stage before they reach that next stage. So be intentional, like, hey, if you got middle school students during 8th grade, how do you use that 8th grade year to start exposing them to the high school ministry? If you know, you got students that are reaching that driver's license, junior, senior year, how are we raising the expectation on them, using them as leaders, using them as servants, using them as disciple makers? We're approaching that before they get there. Same thing with seniors. We're exposing them to college ministry. Same thing with young adults. We're exposing them to the life of the church, helping them get plugged in, build other relationships outside this specific ministry, serving. I think it's always going to be relational, and serving is always going to be the biggest sticking power. But here's the deal, is we can't wait until the gap to do that. We have to plan and be proactive and get ready as the gap is approaching. We're already being proactive in those scenarios.
One quick example of that is Falls Creek in Oklahoma. They have a program called Next Chapter, where the high school seniors go to that. And there's actually the BCM directors and college pastors from the state come based on what campus, and they can find their BCM director or a leader there that can get to know them and tell them about the ministry, and they can meet other students even from the same graduating class to already make friendships with. And so that's an easy thing. I mean, I'm sure it takes a lot of work and all that, but I think camps and youth ministries could do that across the nation. I would love to see something like that Next Chapter program that Falls Creek is doing be implemented. And maybe we'll even do a whole episode, just kind of talk about the nuts and bolts of those type of things. Great. I also know about, I was talking to Trace, who's a leader of a network of retreats that he leads. They started one in Auburn called the Oaks, where basically I think they're going to have 1,000 incoming freshmen do a retreat the week before school starts. So these students, it's a Christian retreat. And so these Christian students are coming and they're getting to know one another. The different ministries are partnering together on it. And so they're discovering their people and finding their tribe even before the rush and the hype of Welcome Week takes off. So they kind of have this retreat. I know there's a similar one, I think it's called Impact at A&M. So there's different ones, but there's lots of different ways. But I think being intentional about those can be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. A familiar face has such an impact, or just knowing going in, okay, when I go to this event or go to this ministry for the first time, I'm going to know at least one face or one person. Yes. So I'm not just walking into the room blind, but I can walk in and go, oh, hey, whoever that is. So I really think that does have such an impact. I'm so glad there are so many ministries and just different even conventions, state conventions, trying to work together to close these gaps. Shane, would you just end and close by just giving a word of encouragement to these next gen leaders who are faithfully discipling students, especially in all these different transitions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would just say from the beginning, it's kind of like the great theologians G.I. Joe said. Lacey, do you know who G.I. Joe is? Is that before your time?
No, I know what it is. I mean, it's like a character.
Yes. Group of characters.
I've heard of what it is.
Yeah, they're the real American hero. All right. Hey, but yeah, the great theologians and philosophers, G.I. Joe used to say this: knowing is half the battle. All right. So I would just say, let's just start by knowing that those gaps are there. And if we know those gaps are there, then let's just start asking the questions in our context with our leaders and our team, going, how are we going to close those gaps? Because the finer details is going to look different in every context. So I would just say, hey, knowing's half the battle. Going, hey, we know these gaps are here. How are we going to address it? And we want you to know, hey, listen, this is somewhat of a new conversation for us. Like, we've realized for several years that those gaps are there. I think they've actually gotten worse and wider after the pandemic and, through all those changes. So we're still learning too. We're students too, and we want to learn from you. So if you're addressing those gaps in effective ways and you're seeing some really neat wins through those, we want to hear about it and we want to learn from you. So if you're doing that, we would love to just hear from you. And you can just email us at evangelism@nam.net, just evangelism@nam.net, and tell us how you're addressing those gaps in your ministry, because we want to learn from you. And that gives us the ability to share your story with others who are asking those questions.
That's so good. And as always, we'll have some resources linked for you guys in the show notes, including this article that a lot of this conversation was based off that Shane wrote. So if you guys want to go deeper into that, and we'll have some other resources just for you to follow up on, or you can always go to gensend.org and make sure you're following us so that we can share with you guys when we have more resources coming out. Like Shane mentioned, him and Paul are working on some exciting stuff to kind of close this gap even more and equip you guys more and equip leaders more to close this gap. And so we loved getting to have this conversation today. We hope it encouraged you. We hope it helped you identify maybe something that you didn't notice before. And we can't wait to talk with you next time.